Hello, my name is Ruth Platt, and you're listening to Cinepod, the Cinematography podcast.
The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Hey, Ben. How's it going?
You know, honestly, we've had better weeks. This week, we lost one of our own, and it sucks.
That's really true. And, of course, we're talking about the entirely preventable and fatal shooting that happened on the movie Rust. Now, before we get into this, and I want to try to keep our we could easily talk for a very long time about this, but I don't want to. We have a whole show. We have a bunch of things going on. So we're going to try and, I think, do appropriate justice to talk about it here. But really, we've got a great show today. Who's on the show today, Ben?
Ruth Platt, the amazing director of the new horror movie Martyrs Lane, which is on Shudder. And it's a great atmospheric ghost story with two young girls at the center, and just brilliantly directed. I think they were 8 or 9 years old, both of them, and it's gorgeous. And we've been talking to a few people outside of cinematographers specifically lately, and it's great to talk to directors sometimes and kind of break down their visual approach and also their career. And I think a lot of our listeners, a lot of them are cinematographers, but many of them are people who are getting into filmmaking or thinking about getting into filmmaking. I think it's good to hear a perspective from a director.
I agree. I think it's great to mix it up and get some directors into these conversations. So that's wonderful. I actually wasn't part of that interview, so I'm really looking forward to listening to it.
She's brilliant, and it is that Halloween season, so please check out Martyrs Lane if you can. If you can check out Shudder, I know I talk about Shudder a lot on here, and I have, full disclosure, worked for Shudder once, but I really do think it's an amazing streaming service, and I was already a subscriber long before I ever worked for them. And I feel like they have a lot of new cool genre films, and this is one of them. If you like horror movies but you're afraid of seeing something that's horribly gory or graphically violent, this is not that. This is a very thoughtful, interesting, introspective ghost story, and I think a lot of our listeners will dig it. So I think that both of us were shocked when I think the news broke on Thursday. We're recording this on Sunday about the on-set death on Rust. And it really upset me a lot. And I don't know if I did myself a service or a disservice, but I kind of sat down and had like a little tweet storm. But I've been walking around and thinking about why we use blanks on set for a long time, because it is not necessary. It's not necessary at all. I think that we've spoken about this, prior to this tragedy on a number of occasions, because one of the things we've talked about, sure, plenty, is hours and safety and all the other sort of elements. Yeah, and we should say, by the way, like, accidents like this are outrageously rare. You know what's common? People getting hearing loss because they're around a lot of blank fire. There are injuries that are not newsworthy that you get from having blanks fired near your face all the time.
And I also think that this brings up the larger discussion about working conditions and rushing and safety and cutting corners. The first job that I ever worked on, I got a minor concussion, and it's like, that's... Yeah. Oh, no. It was like, hey, welcome to the industry. I was getting paid $2.25 an hour, and I ended up with a concussion, and I had to go to the emergency room. And, let me tell you, I learned really quickly about something I didn't know about, which was, the 20-year-old version of myself. I was 20 or maybe 21. They sent me to the emergency room, and when it came time to figure out how to pay for all of it, I was like, oh, well, it's going to get covered by workers' comp. I was on the job. And then I ended up talking to like an adjuster, and they were like, well, according to what production tells us, is that you're an independent contractor. So this is all on you. This is not on the production. The production says you're an independent contractor. So you got hurt on the job, and now you're gonna have to pay this bill. It was a real wake up call for me. So
I have a story too, not unlike that. I was probably 19, maybe 18. And it was in the early days of Universal Studios Florida, and a company that is still in business, I'm not going to name them, had a bunch of us out there building a set at Universal Studios Florida. And I could not have been more excited. It was the first time I'd ever set foot inside a professional soundstage. At the time, I probably weighed about 130 pounds soaking wet, so I could get under this stage that they were building and screw stuff together. And I was there working my butt off all day, and a giant set piece fell over and hit me. And it wasn't like a concussion kind of thing, but it was like, suddenly I had kind of a stiff neck. And you know what they did? They sent me home. And I think they were paying like $8 an hour or something. And I don't remember the name of the people who did this. I don't really remember anything about it. But to me, it's like I was too young and dumb to know that I probably should have gone to the hospital and gotten checked out. Like it was like this giant stack of flats or something, just kind of that hadn't been secured, fell over and hit me. And it wasn't even something I was working on. It was just happened to be in the same sound stage. And again, this is a company that if I said their name, you'd be like, oh yeah, I know exactly everything about that company. And it's total bullshit because they back then and now have real money to spend on stuff like this. But of course, they were all gold rushing into Orlando at the time for the plentiful non-union crew. And, I'm sure that whoever sent me home was like, I don't want to get in trouble because it was probably their fault.
And, I think it's important to bring up these sort of, our own personal experiences because your experience, my experience early on, this is not unique. This is far from unique. A lot of people get injured. Sadly, some people die, and it's mostly entirely preventable, and there's no reason for the type of accidents and deaths that occur. And of course, we're talking about Helena Hutchins, who we're Facebook friends. I believe we had met in passing a couple times over the years. She and I share probably 100 friends on Facebook and stuff. And so going onto Facebook right now is a really it's sort of a gut-wrenching experience just because as we're speaking right now, there's actually a candlelight vigil going on in Burbank at Local 80. It's like, and I saw some of the photos that are coming in from that, and it's just an incredible outpouring of people and support. And I'm really glad to see the industry doing that. And I think just recently when we were talking about union contracts and stuff like that, we talked about, this industry and what it sort of toll it takes on people. But, man, it's doom scrolling for me. I really don't, I can't go onto Facebook and I can't scroll one notch without another outpouring of support for her family and or people posting articles about what happened. And a good friend of ours, someone who I won't mention their name, but they were directly connected to the camera operator who was working on the set at the time, and he filled me in on a bunch of information to basically separate, at least give me some fact from fiction. And that doesn't make it any better. No, and I don't even want to get into all that, but it doesn't make it any better to hear exactly like how terrible this is. And I'm sure that this will all come out eventually. But what I think it is worth saying is that it's fucked up. It is so fucked up, and
it's super fucked up. And I have to say, in 2021, that I'm given to understand this was a relatively low budget movie.
$7 million.
Oh, that's actually not even, it's low budget, but it's a high enough budget that you could hire a real armorer.
It's high enough budget that you could, pay your crew. High enough budget that you could get them hotel rooms. High enough budget that you could have real safety.
I've heard a lot of the abuse stuff going on that set and how the crew were treated.
You could have safety meetings. You could actually have, all the stuff that should be going into it.
I just kind of feel like in 2021, why are we bringing real guns onto set and firing blank loads when you can get outrageously good replicas like Airsoft is the one everyone uses. There's a number of different companies that sell extremely convincing replicas, and then you can create or you can buy rather inexpensively your own library of muzzle flashes that you can add. And this was sort of my Twitter rant was sort of about this. It's like there's no reason, and even in the most practical sense, when it goes perfectly well with blank fire, it's one of those things that for the benefit that you get out of it, it eats so much more time because every time you're doing a scene that's got blank fire, you're going to have a safety meeting. It's going to take 30 minutes. You've just kissed away 30 minutes every time you have a scene where there's any blank fire. Now, if you're firing 5 blanks, that's as many safety meetings as it is if you're firing 1 blank, as long as it's in the same scene. but it slows everything down. You have to pass out earplugs to the whole crew. You have to put up plexiglass and or plywood around the set. It's fucking bullshit. I mean, honestly, it's bullshit. And as a filmmaker, again, pretending everything went perfectly smoothly, I've been lucky. One of the armorers I've worked with before is a guy named Charlie Parrish. Charlie is fucking amazing. He's on it and a safety nerd like an armorer should be. And I don't want to see Charlie lose a job. At the same time, when I made my movie and I had 15 days, I would not be surprised if you told me that 7 hours of that shoot, so like more than half a day, might have been spent on safety meetings. And I would rather have that half a day back to shoot other stuff, which you could do if you were just using a prop gun that posed no one any danger.
One of the things that really bothers me is all the mentions in all the mainstream media about prop gun.
They're not prop guns. It's a gun.
They're not. It's a gun. It's a real gun. And that is the big disconnect, I think, with the public out there and what goes on a sets. They're real guns with blank loads.
People also think that like if I point a blank at you and I'm like
there's
5 inches away from your face,
no danger, and that's absolutely false too.
And a blank will fuck you up. A blank is, I mean, like all that stuff you see coming out the front of the gun in the muzzle flash, that's traveling all coming out fast, really supersonically. The bang is breaking the sound barrier.
There's different levels of loads too, quarter loads, half loads. There's different amounts of power. All of this can, if the money exists for people to rent real guns to use in production, the money certainly exists for a company to go out there and make a prop that actually does what it's supposed to do. And I tell you, they're going to clean up because I think that
1,000%. I mean, Airsoft should just figure out a way to have like a spring-loaded something or other inside the airsoft gun that gives it some recoil. But I've never been pulled out of a movie because the guns didn't have realistic enough recoil. And I also feel like for anyone who says that like VFX are expensive, it's like, okay, so think about the 30 minutes of downtime on your set and hiring an armorer. So that's like a full-time person on your set anyway. Then you're going to stop work for 30 minutes and have a safety meeting. You're going to pass out all these earplugs. You've got to buy them, blah, 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 versus hiring one person to do this in post.
I'm going to interject right here. And I know that, for all our listeners, you essentially just got a Cliff Notes version of the rant that Ben had on Twitter in the last couple of days. And that rant got you quite a bit of attention, actually. You got contacted by like Reuters and was the BBC.
Sky News, BBC,
A whole bunch of people wanted to talk to you because you went on a very detailed rant about how there doesn't need to ever be a real gun on set, ever. And
I would say at the very least, it should be a supreme rarity.
Yeah.
Like, you've got to have some kind of crazy specific thing you're going
on
for.
A gun for some thing or reason or whatnot.
And honestly, if you're doing close-ups, if you, let's say you want to have bespoke muzzle flash that isn't from a library, so no one will pick out the one frame of muzzle flash on your stuff, then hire a unit to go film it with real guns in a safe way. I mean, there's nothing wrong. I'm not an anti-gun person. This is like a workplace safety thing, and there's no reason for anyone to die for this because there's no reason to do it at all.
Yeah, 100%. Anyway, well, Ben, we could easily rant into these microphones until our listeners' ears bleed. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to table this conversation. We can talk about it some more, maybe in short ends or in future episodes as more stuff goes on.
Well, and I will be revisiting this a little bit in my short end, but it will be with practical advice for anyone who's thinking about doing stuff with guns, like other very safe ways to get the gun effects you want done.
Yeah, and we'll probably touch base as the story unfolds a little bit more, but for the most part, actually, it's out there and everywhere. And if you're in these circles, you're probably overwhelmed. Each time I feel like some of these terrible tragedies happen, there's a little bit of reform that happens in the industry. A little bit. Yeah. There's more consciousness. I mean,
But I feel like since the last time there was a high-profile shooting on set, which would have been Brandon Lee in 1993, I feel like in that time, the digital revolution has become so ubiquitous that that now it's just like obvious to anyone with eyes that we don't need to do this anymore. And I feel like, I've had several people say, why are we even still using blanks today? And the only answer that I really have is because we always have. I think that people move away from change. I had tried to convince a producer once to let me use VFX muzzle flashes and stuff, and was talked out of it, and I regret it.
I mean, it's time for the industry to grow up in some ways that it probably never thought it would. It probably thought it would just continue on the same way forever, but no, it really can't continue the way it's been.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's get to the interview.
Here is Ruth Platt.
The Cinematography Podcast Interview.
I am here, I believe, transcontinentally. You're in England, correct?
That's right.
With director Ruth Platt, director of Martyrs Lane, which is currently streaming on Shudder. I watched it just a couple days ago. Just beautiful, beautiful work. So congratulations for getting the film made and getting it released on Shudder. I never stop talking about Shudder on here. I love Shudder. So let's start by talking about Martyrs Lane. It looks like you made it as a short film first. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. Well, what happened is I went into development with the BFI, which is the British Film Institute in the UK. There's very few sources of independent film funding in the UK, and the BFI is the main source, basically. So I was really so chuffed to get into development with them after feeling like an outsider, really, in the industry for a long time, making self-funded movies, shorts and micro-budget features. So I went into development with them. It took quite a while in development. And one of the things they wanted a sort of proof of feature short. So we did that as a sort of condition of trying to get greenlit for the feature. So it was a weird thing, really, because I had a feature script already, and trying to distill or condense a feature idea and a feature story into a short. Usually it's the other way around. You've got the seed of the idea, and then you're kind of developing it. But this was like it felt like a strange kind of bottleneck kind of process, But it was good. We established the tone a little more. I think that was what they wanted. They it has two kids in the leads. It's genre, but establishing the tone of the genre was important, and we learned a lot doing that short. So that's how it happened.
Well, and ghost movies are always a fun thing, and I feel like, no offense to James Wan, I love his work, but I feel like we're awash with those kinds, the insidious kind of ghost stories. And, what you've made is something that maybe it's a lot more contemplative and maybe reminds me a little more of like one of my personal favorites, Peter Medak's The Changeling. But I'm curious, like, what your inspirations were going into it. What inspired you to make it? I know you've made other genre films, but they were it is a horror film, but it's very quiet, it's very contemplative, it's creepy, it gets under your skin. It's not there's no rampaging monsters or anything.
It started off a little bit more horror, I think, and a bit more visceral, and perhaps with alternative or additional points of view. And through the development, we realized it had to go through the eyes of this one child. Then you have a responsibility when you're putting the whole performance and the whole perception of the whole thing through the eyes of this and the shoulders of this 10-year-old girl. And so that's probably what shaped it towards a more under the skin, unsettling ghost story, because it's about what she, I always think she's like a little living ghost. It's about her being ignored and invisible in this adult house, and what she picks up on and what she doesn't, and how she perceives things, and her nightmare world and her imagination and all these things come into play. So that naturally and organically took it into a different place tonally. I was a little bit worried about it. I think, it either works for you or it doesn't. Some people love the James Wan and the
Nothing wrong with it. I mean, those are all fun, It's
a great play. There's a place for it, definitely. I love it. I love so much of genre. But I felt it was quite high risk going this way with this film, but it felt inevitable with putting two children in the leads. I didn't want to have that kind of exploitative process with children where you're kind of putting an adult stamp on children and using them for the genre, in a gratuitous way. So I felt a responsibility to sort of get inside her character and to position it that way. In terms of influences, I'm really ashamed to say I haven't seen The Changeling, and I really need to see that because someone else...
It's so great.
I must see that. I'm going to see that this week. Thanks for that tip. Someone else mentioned it to me, and it's in my head. So there's a film called The Spirit of the Beehive, which is not a horror, but it's in that delicate world between genre and art house, I guess. It's slightly a ghost story, and it has two children at the centre of it. And it's about a child. It's got some very beautiful naturalistic children's performances, but within this slightly strange space of the child's imagination and the child's nightmares and taking sense of the adult world. So that was a big influence, a Spanish film. There were other Spanish kind of ghost story genre films that had an influence as well. The Devil's Backbone, Guillermo del Toro, Pan's Labyrinth.
So amazing. Both of those movies.
I love Guillermo del Toro, but those are like the two biggest masterpieces from him, those two, and both centered around kids as well, yeah.
They are, and I think sometimes Devil's Backbone is slightly lesser known, and I just love the Devil's Backbone.
Yeah, I mean they're almost companion pieces. Like I want him to make a third chapter in the Spanish Civil War trilogy, ghost whatever paranormal fantasy trilogy.
And yeah, exactly. And I guess because mine's more of a domestic, more centered on this one house, this one family. But what I love about his films is that backdrop of the Civil War, and the real evil is fascism. The monsters and the ghosts are not the bad guys.
Yeah.
And let's talk about sort of the visual palette of it, because it has a very stylized look, but not stylized in a way that's distracting in any way. But what were your inspirations, and how did you work with your cinematographer to kind of build the look that you created in the film?
Yeah, I wanted a slightly timeless feel, so you couldn't quite specify the period. And I had this idea that the house, it was really hard actually finding a house. It's not an autobiographical story, but the setting is slightly autobiographical. I was a kid growing up in an older family, kind of feeling like I shouldn't be seen or heard, and overhearing and listening and being shut out and going to bed early and listening on stairs. And that house, that setting was a little bit from my own memory. I had this idea that the house was a bit like the mother's brain. So the downstairs is this busy, populated daytime ministry where there's lots of people coming and going, and there's lots of stuff to distract you. And then the nighttime is the subconscious, the unconscious, even the collective unconscious upstairs, dark, long corridors, dark spaces, silence, where the nightmares creep in. And, Leah is rattling around in this space.
Yeah.
It's a bit like she's rattling around in her mother's head, lost and slightly unseen. And then other things come into that space. So we talked a lot about how to create that cinematically, and the shots and the lighting. The lighting was very important, creating this slightly dreamy, luminous kind of nighttime space that hovers between the conscious and the subconscious world. And again, I was heavily influenced by the Spirit of the Beehive in that look, in that cinematic look. So that's what Mark and I discussed. He was very keen to use these hook speed Pancro lenses, which have quite a retro feel. They're not that sharp, not that digital. They give it a slightly less crisp look. And so I guess there's a slightly retro look to the film.
There's something impressionistic about the way you shot it, about the way light sources were placed. Like we have light going right into the camera, but it wasn't flary in a J.J. Abrams kind of way.
Abrams was going to say, yeah.
It's
the
not
artificial flares.
I guess those are my kind of impressions of it. And while I'm watching something, a film like this, and I'm so glad you brought up Devil's Backbone, I'm always wondering too, like, how do you create the environment for children to be able, because like getting children who can act is hard. And then also like keeping them, I have a 3-year-old, so I don't even know, I can't even begin to think about getting him to focus to the degree that, I don't know how old your lead was. I would assume she was probably 8 or 9 or something like that.
She was 10. Yeah, she was 10.
10, okay.
Yeah.
I was close. But like, how do you keep the boring technical process away from the kids so that they can just kind of live in their imaginations and also read the lines that you wrote and be in character and do all the stuff that they have to do? Did any of the way that you approach the filmmaking of it, was it accommodating for the fact that 2 of your leads were both really young?
Well, the major accommodation we had to make was time, because there's very strict time limits, how many hours you can work with children of a certain age, and very strict laws around that. So we were very limited in terms of the actual time we had, and that was a major obstacle really to independent filmmaking, having 2 children as your leads. So we tried to prep as much as we could, when they weren't on set, and we had a double, a child who could sit in for them when we're lighting and things like that. But for me, I heard that Michael Haneke saw 5,000 kids for the White Ribbon, and we didn't have the scale or the time or the budget for that kind of casting process. So we saw relatively few kids compared to something like that. But and you can tell very quickly when children have learned to conceal or perform in a very polished way, and when they're not doing that, and when they're much more raw, and there's a place for them to move towards. There's fluidity and flexibility in what they're doing, because they are using their own personality. I think it's about empathy and emotional intelligence. And I think all children have that. I think all people have that. But some kids have more access to it and have been more used to using it than others, and just have a more natural sort of proclivity. And I think these 2 kids, I felt very quickly that I could work with them. And we did try lots of different pairs. They had this chemistry, also these 2 kids. I think kids, even it doesn't really matter about their age. It's capturing something spontaneous and alive and free. And that's the magic. It's the magic that adult actors have to capture as well. So I don't see children actors, because of their age, being an issue. I think actually sometimes they can be freer. And I think if I have one regret, it's that we didn't have more time for improvisation and more time for just following them and experimenting more in their performance, away from the script. Because as soon as you put a script into their mouths, they've got to, there is an adult filter there, So my focus was trying to see how would you say this line, and maybe changing it if they wouldn't say that. Do you connect with this? What's your favorite food? What would you like to say here? And then what do you think you're trying to get from her here? So instead of looking at a long story arc or a big story arc and putting all that information into their head, which is not how we speak and not how we act or behave, we just kept it in the moment. What do you want right now? What are you thinking right now? What do you want out of her? How is she making you feel? And just kept it in the moment. And when we were setting up, if they did have to wait around, I would just keep them moving, keep them breathing, playing games, keeping them thinking and alive, so that there was life inside their inner life. And as long as you've got that, before we shot, I would always try and get them running around or moving so that they're breathing. And I think as soon as you're breathing, you're not holding on to tension, you're not dead inside, you're not flat. I've damaged a few mics by doing that, getting them to run around and then the mic's falling on the ground.
Oh, no.
It's worth it. And you had made another film called The Black Forest that has, the kids aren't the leads in that, but there's a lot of kids in it, right? Or there's a lot of child performances.
Yes. And I worked in a similar way with them, yeah.
Can you talk about what kind of preparation, pre-visualization, storyboards, shot lists, or, what your process is for kind of breaking down a scene to shoot it?
Before Martyrs Lane, I have made, feature films on shorts budgets, basically. So there's never been any time, very little time for prep. Time for prep on this was much shorter than I'd hoped as well. I dream of that time when you have 2 or 3 weeks for the director of photography to meticulously plan every shot. That's one thing I would really, it's an ambition I still have to achieve. I would love to have that. But a lot of it's quite instinctive. So if I'm trying to reflect an interior narrative or an emotional narrative, I was discussing with Mark how to do that. And we talked about our influences and our references, and we did storyboard some of the more sort of difficult sequences to shoot. We storyboarded, but not everything. So a lot of it had to happen quite quickly, actually. And we had to problem solve some issues. For example, we were supposed to have a drone shot that we meticulously planned, and then the drone didn't work in the woods, which is something I've never quite experienced. So we ended up getting a rickshaw and putting the Steadicam guy on a rickshaw, and my lovely grip legged it down the road 15 times as fast as he could, pushing this rickshaw with the Steadicam guy on the rickshaw. So there were
that's awesome.
Yeah, and it works. It's a good shot. But we had to problem solve an awful lot, and even though it was a bigger budget than I'd ever had, it still felt like quite a tight budget.
They're never big enough. It's never going to be big enough. We talk to people who shoot Marvel movies and they're like, yeah, we were on a really tight schedule. It's like, you had everything. Okay.
But what I'm glad about is that, a lot of the time people say, do it in post, do it in post, do it in post. And I tried to do as much in camera as I could. So
that was a thing that I really picked up on too. It didn't feel like a movie that had been futzed with too much digitally. It felt like it was all really there, which I appreciate. I mean, I feel like it sells better to the camera. It looks better. It viscerally as a viewer, you accept the reality of it more.
Yeah, I think CGI, when it's enhancing something in a very minimal way, is absolutely brilliant. But but I think people are realizing that, the industry is realizing that now. There seems to be a shift away from it. But at one point, it was just you just can tell there's something in you that knows it's not real, and there's something this is such an organic film that I wanted to make sure those sort of moments in the film that could have been CGI, but hopefully aren't. Most of them, actually, yeah, all of them were as organic as possible. And that reads to the human eye in a very different way, I think. So, and also, the producer's like, oh yeah, do it in post, I haven't got time. But then, post comes along, oh, well, there's no budget for that. And thank God I did it. Thank God I did it in camera, because we would never have done it. Yeah, there's a couple of things that, we did on camera that I'm so thrilled we found solutions to. And there are other funny little things like, I cradled a dead fly and another dead creature for quite a long time, and then placed it carefully in front of the camera, and then blew it really hard to animate it, and people are like, what the hell is she doing? But it works, it works.
You're making a movie.
Yeah, I was so chuffed with my little dead fly. She looks at a fly and a fly flies off. People are like, well, you're gonna have to do that in post, or we can't get a fly wrangler. So I just found this little dead fly and I preserved it, and then I we managed to blow it so it kind of took off horizontally. I was very pleased with that.
That's so much fun. I love hearing stories like that, though. So I'd love to talk a little bit about your career leading up to this, because you have actually a lot of acting credits, but also you've directed, I think, 3 features and a bunch of shorts. I'm a big genre person, and I love the horror genre, and I love seeing people who execute it well. What drew you to horror? Was that always the direction that you were going in as a filmmaker?
No, so I'm a little bit sore about the idea that I've made 3 movies, because my first 2 features were made on shorts budgets, kind of self-funded, and Martyrs Lane was like my first funded, supported film. So I kind of feel like it should be seen as my debut film, really. But that was my fault. I made features. I just wanted to get out there and prove myself, I think. My first 2 shorts were not genre. They were dark. They had a dark sensibility to them. But I think I was feeling quite angry when I made the lesson, not at teenagers, but angry at being a woman who had felt outside the industry for so long and had 2 children, and I just felt very unheard and unable to break into the industry. So it was a sort of way of channeling all that anger. So I'm slightly worried that people think I was sort of advocating for torturing teenagers, because that's not what the film's about. The film's about, it's a sort of satire on the education system, really, the broken education system, and a satire on power. So I worry slightly that people misinterpreted it and take it literally.
Storytelling is not necessarily advocacy. Like, you're not making a PSA about why the behavior in your movie is right. And I feel like there was a wave of movies that movie kind of fits into, that went to a visceral place, shall we say.
Yeah, I worry when it's compared to torture porn, because I was trying to do something. I mean, to be honest, the film that inspired me was Michael Haneke's Funny Games. And I read Brandon Cronenberg.
Also quite a visceral film.
A very visceral film. But what Brandon Cronenberg said was, I don't like easy violence. I don't like films where the violence is, bang, 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 gun and bullet, like Deadpool, where, it's bang, 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 bullet in the head, ha ha. And it's like, I remember my kids seeing it and I'm thinking, that violence is so easy and glossy and smooth, and what Brandon Cronenberg said is violence should be difficult to witness and watch and uncomfortable. Yeah. And that's what I was trying to do in the lesson. I was trying to raise some ethical challenges, because there is so much gratuitous violence, and it's almost as if there's a lot of teenage slasher kind of movie tropes, isn't there, about like beautiful young bodies being murdered and tortured and all that. And I was trying to make that, turn that on its head and say, look, this is really uncomfortable and really ethically problematic. But I'm not sure if all that nuance got seen.
Well, I mean, I'm hoping that Martyrs Lane will encourage people to go back and look at your filmography, because I do feel like we're in a moment right now, specifically in the genre world, where people are looking for that nuance, and they're looking for. I feel like 15 years ago, whatever, when torture porn was all the rage in the horror world, as a lifelong horror guy, I never really had a taste for that stuff either. I would always go more for the Martyrs Lane kind of movies, like the supernatural, creepy, think about it later. I mean, I could make an argument for, Dario Argento and some of that stuff, which was also extremely, sometimes I think, leaned into that kind of stuff, but was always so surreal and weird and nightmarish that it was more like you'd think about what you saw later like it was a terrible nightmare you'd had. But I do think that today people are more in the genre world, are really looking at the subtle shadings of stuff and the satire, and how horror can be used to kind of get a big idea across. Obviously, probably the most conspicuous example of that is Jordan Peele and everything that he's doing, because like he's making horror movies, including Candyman, which he didn't direct, but he executive produced it. They're definitely kind of not smuggling, but just kind of infusing the genre stuff with some kind of a social message. So, hopefully people will go back and look and see that that's what you were doing in that film.
I really hope so. Perhaps it was just too oblique and too subtle, and didn't have enough of a social message. I mean, I thought it was pretty clear, but I mean, obviously with budgetary constraints as well, we did put this teacher teaching the lesson of his dreams in this place, and it was very claustrophobic and enclosed in that space for a very long time. So obviously if I had more of a budget, I would have opened it up a little bit more and played with it more narratively. But, I wanted to sort of push that oppressiveness of the education system and play with that satire. So I think, some people have loved it, and it's really, really reassuring that some people have loved it. Some people have thought I've been saying that teenagers should be tortured. So yeah, it's been slightly uncomfortable, I guess. But I hope people will see it for its real intentions. And also, it's not supposed to denigrate teachers either, obviously.
No.
Martyrs Lane to me is so accomplished and so well made. It's hard for me to believe that. I mean, like, I always ask people, like, oh, you went to Sundance, oh, you won an Oscar, was your phone ringing off the hook the next week? And the answer is always like, not much more. But I do wonder, like, what happens when you release something that I feel like from an objective standpoint, anyone could look at this and see this is accomplished work and this is someone who really knows what they're doing. Like, how has it changed your professional life?
I think it's a film that hopefully some people connect with and some people don't. It's not genre enough for some people. It wasn't genre enough for some of the big festivals. And I feel really, and it was really hit by COVID and it was actually a very painful process of not being, it hasn't had the recognition that I hoped it would have. And I'm so grateful to Shudder for picking it up, and they love it. And they've been so supportive. But it's been hard. I put 5 years of my life into it. It was a very long development process. It's so hard to raise money for independent film in this country. And I'd love to have slightly taken off a little bit more. So it's really great when people do respond well to it, and it means a lot because it was such a large part of my life. And I just hope I get to make another film in the not too distant future. Yeah, because it's the first funded film I've ever made. That's how ridiculously hard it's been. It's the only funded film I've ever made.
Well, I mean, it's amazing work, and I feel like we've taken quite a lot of your time here. So before we go, is there any place online where people can, obviously, I would encourage anyone listening to this, go check out Martyrs Lane. It's on Shudder. If you don't have Shudder, you can get it on Prime. You have to sign up for Shudder, but you can get it's awesome. It's worth it. So please check it out. But is there any other place online where people can see your directing work?
I think on Vimeo. I have my shorts are on Vimeo, I think.
Oh, cool. But do you have like an Instagram or Twitter?
I'm Ruthario P on Instagram and Twitter. Ruthario
Excellent.
P.
Well, thank you again so much for coming on here. Congratulations on your film. I hope that it's just a slow burn and people will start to check it out over time. No, I think it's great work. And thanks for coming on the show.
Not at all. Pleasure. Thank you.
So that was Ruth Platt. Thanks again for coming on the show, Ruth. And I can't wait to see what you have next. I really enjoyed her film.
And now, short ends.
Hey, Ben, it is short end time. You ready to dive into short ends?
I am. And, as I said, my short end, I think, is maybe a quick accounting of, and I'm sure that there are more that I'm not even aware of some of the ways to get the muzzle flash that you want in your movies. If you're using airsoft guns or you're using replica guns, I've even done it on like sketch comedy stuff with toy guns. So there's several collections of muzzle flash that you can get that are stock, that are pre-keyed, that are basically drag and drop. They're not going to get you all the way there depending on what you're doing. In some cases, they might get you all the way there. The granddaddy of them all was Video Co-Pilot's Action Essentials. There's another one that we've talked about on the show called Action VFX. And then one that somebody in my Twitter rant actually made me aware of, @BlendThatFilm was the person who made me aware of it, is that Red Giant, who's a big VFX company, they have one that I watched the demo of it. It's called Bang. And basically it's 3D, which I guess means it's for After Effects, modeler of muzzle flashes. And you can choose what kind of gun it is, and it makes a 3D gun that you line up with your gun so that it knows exactly where the muzzle is, the size of the muzzle, the direction of it, et cetera, et cetera. And you're able to model 3D muzzle flash. Pretty amazing stuff. I mean, like what I saw of it looked really good. And I would also direct everybody, which I did this in my Twitter rant as well, to a group that I have talked about on the show before, which is Corridor Digital. Their YouTube channel is Corridor Crew, and they did a thing where they felt that the muzzle flash in a specific scene in John Wick could be improved upon. And not only is it just entertaining because they're all kind of cool artist types and they talk about it, what they talk about in very interesting ways. They explain every element that's in muzzle flash, the flash itself, the bloom, the smoke. So it's sort of like the flash that you're seeing, what it's doing to the lens, how far the smoke should go, that kind of stuff. And they're pointing in John Wick, like frame by frame, you're looking at muzzle flash and being like, oh yeah, that doesn't look right when you freeze frame it. When you're watching a real-time action scene, you're not really thinking about that stuff, but I think we're probably going to be thinking about the stuff more than we have in the past. And I would just encourage everyone to watch it, because I just want people to know that nobody's saying don't make movies without guns. Actually, several people said this to me over the last several days. What if we just stop making movies with guns in them? And I'm like, A, I like movies with guns in them. B, good luck making people not want movies with guns in them. We're still going to have guns in movies. That's just life. As long as audiences...
Certainly American life.
I mean, I seem to recall this one British secret agent guy who's been in a bunch of semi-successful movies who seems to use guns a bit.
There wouldn't be a movie of his in the theater right now, would there be?
Not at all. I think it's kind of a worldwide thing. I'm not saying censor your movies. I'm saying there's a better solution. And honestly, when I was working on Chosen, I was like, oh my God, we can get so many more setups done like this. And also, I'm never afraid anyone's going to get hurt.
Yeah.
So I feel like I just want filmmakers to know that there's a multitude of amazing resources out there for them to accomplish this stuff, and to accomplish it very safely and honestly, less expensively.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the end of my short end. Ilya, what is your short end this week?
My short end is actually somewhat controversial. And it's the movie Dune. I saw Dune at the Warner Brothers lot in a fantastic, really, really loud screening room, which I think is the way that you should see it. I know you watched it at home, and I think a lot of people watched it at home, but it still made like $30-something million at the box office, so good for them. But what I think is really interesting about Dune...
You're of course talking about David Lynch's Dune from 1984.
I am not talking about David Lynch's Dune. I'm talking about the new 2021 Dune, starring Timothée Chalamet and...
directed by Denis Villeneuve, shot by friend of the show... Greg Fraser,
that's right,
who could say nothing about Dune when we talked to him, and no matter how much I tried to pry Dune info out of him, I wanted Dune, hot Dune skinny from him. Wasn't going to get it.
Well, you might remember that some number of weeks ago on the show, I was saying how my short end was this movie because of the trailer. I watched the trailer. I tried to block it out. I watched the trailer. I thought it was great. Couldn't wait to see it. Wasn't going to watch anything else. And before I get into what I thought of the movie and why I think that it's worthy for talking about the short end here, I think it's wonderful when I really like a polarizing movie, and this movie is decidedly polarizing. If you just type in Dune review into Google, the top things that come up run the whole gamut. For example, The Guardian says that it is a sci-fi epic that gets off to an electrifying start. The New Yorker says, a Dune sanded to dullness. NPR says sci-fi epic Dune is an immersive but incomplete experience. And this kind of goes on and on.
It is incomplete in that it's only telling like the first half of the first book.
100%. And, I heard lots of comments from people because it's available on HBO. And the comments have ranged a lot, like, oh, well, they ripped off Star Wars. And I got to remind everyone that this, like the book was originally written in, I think, the mid 60s, like 65.
Yeah.
So this intellectual property, this story exists long before there was Star Wars and a lot of other things. But truly, if you look at the David Lynch version, which I feel like is very much an opera, it doesn't have a lot of the perhaps identification and development that you might like to have with some of the characters, and there's a lot crammed in there. It is
also, I watched it about a month ago. The David Lynch version, and I say this with all due respect to David Lynch, and I believe Freddie Francis shot that movie. That movie is wall-to-wall exposition. Holy crap, the exposition never stops.
And I feel like, without spoiling this movie, because there's no spoilers really, since you're essentially seeing a reboot, a remake of the previous movie, there's plenty of exposition, and it hits a lot of the same notes. I think it does a much better job of completing some of the thoughts and completing some of the notes, and doesn't feel so rushed and doesn't feel so exposition, but if you were hoping for that save the cat moment, which allows you to identify with Paul, if you were hoping to, really get invested, if you're the type of person who that sort of movie is for you, and you're not there about the opera and the spectacle and Hans Zimmer's, soundtrack turned up to 11 for, 3/4 of the movie, this is not going to be your cup of tea. If you can enjoy the spectacle, if you can go along with the opera, if you can, buy into all of this stuff, or you're a fan of the original story, I think that Dune is going to be a great ride for you. And if nothing else, the work of Greg Fraser, the work of the production design, the work that goes into the costumes,
VFX.
The VFX, everything is playing at the highest level here. It's really, really impressive. It's a really impressive visual movie. And I'm going to watch it again, 100% going to watch it again. And I'll probably crank it up to 11 again, because it is a immersive experience, exactly like NPR said. And I think that might feel very complete after they release the next part. So we'll see.
I actually might go see it in the theater. Like, I just kind of, out of curiosity, after a day of chasing around a toddler, I was like, let me watch a few minutes of Dune and see if it's something I'm going to like. And full disclosure here, as far as Denis Villeneuve movies go, loved Arrival. I liked Sicario a lot. I was not the world's biggest fan of Blade Runner 2049. It is gorgeous, but I found it to be, I feel like,
I liked this much better than Blade Runner, actually.
Me too. I felt like with Blade Runner, I could have cut 45 minutes out of that movie without cutting a single shot. It was like a lot of shoe leather, like booming Hans Zimmer music while people walked into rooms and looked at stuff. And it was just, people say that the original one is slow. I don't believe the original Blade Runner is all that slow. It was lugubrious to me. And so I kind of I wanted to watch the beginning of Dune to see like how that was going to play out. And I agree with you. No, I think it was captivating and interesting. And if someone said it was a ripoff of Star Wars, I guess like all science fiction from that period maybe is a little similar. My criticisms of it more were like, I never realized it, but this is what the story is. It's a white savior story. It's about
100%.
A colonial, a person,
colonial power
who is a colonist coming in and saving the natives. That is what it is.
And taking all their oil. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant spice.
What I liked about this one versus the David Lynch one is that like Kyle MacLachlan actually, even though I think that might have been his first movie, he looks like he could kick your ass. He looks like a hale person who, is in great shape and ready to be a hero. And Timothée Chalamet in this looks like a little kid. He looks frail, and characters keep pointing it out to him, that he doesn't have that much muscle and whatever. And so to me, it's actually interesting to know that, spoiler alert for anyone who's never read the book or seen the original movie or knows nothing about Dune, he sort of becomes Jesus. He sort of rises and becomes a savior, and like you're seeing him as like not the strongest person, but the visuals in the movie are pretty astonishing. And it's a movie that I don't know 100% I'm going to do this, mostly because of COVID and secondarily because I have a 3-year-old and I never get to do anything, but I might go check it out in the theater because the scope of it is pretty amazing. And I thought that, again, having recently rewatched the David Lynch one, that they were getting the same information across, but also making me like the characters. And I would say if it felt like anything to me, it felt like if Game of Thrones were science fiction.
Yes, very much so. I really found myself thinking of Game of Thrones several times during this. So.
And I mean that as a high compliment.
A high compliment.
Game of Thrones, not including the last season. But, like the Greg Fraser's cinematography is just stunning in this. And everything felt real. And I know that I'm looking at a scene full of 80% of it is VFX creations. I buy them all. Like it looks real.
I found myself almost wondering, though, a couple times when I was watching it, why isn't this 6 hours? Why isn't this an HBO series? Why isn't this why didn't they even give it more space to breathe? They could have really gone into a lot of things, and maybe people would have had a different experience with it. But regardless, I like it on its own merits. I like it for what it is. I think that it's certainly worth watching, especially if you are a fan of wonderful cinematography, incredible sound design, incredible score, and just the way it all fits together. And I gotta I'm giving basically nothing away because it happens in the, no joke, first second of the movie. What did you think of that, amuse bouche, before the title credit, before the Warner Brothers logo that happens before it? There's it's on black, and then there's suddenly this voice that comes in a subtitle. Did that work for you, Ben? I haven't seen another movie.
I've never seen anyone do that. It kind of caught me off guard because I was watching it on HBO Max, and so it's like I'm, getting a drink and, like basically killing the time when those cards are usually up. And I was like, oh, I was supposed to be watching that. And so I had to rewind it and watch it again.
In the theater I was in, since it was a PGA screening, there was no, opening trailers or anything like that. The lights basically went down, and that note hit at a very, very loud volume, and the woman in front of me literally jumped out of her seat a little bit. And then of course the logo comes up, and I admit that I said it out loud, louder, and then everyone around me laughed. And then I got to say that
you were that guy.
I was that guy. I think it's sort of expected actually though at the industry screenings that there's always like that guy who's got the. And anyway, regardless, as we were leaving, there was quite a few comments, and it was interesting to hear people talking about their immediate reaction to it, because these are all people who, I'm going to say probably 98% of that room subscribes to HBO. Probably, it seems like in the industry, everyone subscribes to all the services because they have to stay up with everything. But as we were, these are all people who chose, this is after it had already debuted on HBO. They went to the theater. They wanted to see it. They wanted to have the theatrical experience. And, there was one snarky comment. Someone said, I liked it better when it was called The Mandalorian. And
I mean, props to Greg Fraser there, too.
Props to Greg Fraser, exactly. So, I'm also being the author of the visuals behind that. But very different things. And I don't think that it's really fair that because something is sci-fi, it automatically gets painted with the Star Wars brush. It automatically gets painted with
I mean, just because they both have like science fiction in the desert... It's nothing like The Mandalorian.
It's really not. But this is what, as a filmmaker, this is what you run into. This is what you run into, the inevitable comparisons with everything that's come before.
Oh, I mean, there's nothing you can do about it, honestly. And, when you're working at the level that Denis Villeneuve is working at, like you're going to have obnoxious hipsters like me come and be like, oh, I preferred the original Blade Runner. And, after you've spent, probably 3 years of your life slaving over every frame of it to make it as perfect as you could make it. And, I mean, that's just kind of how it goes. I remember, this is a terrible comparison, but I remember when I directed a production of Richard III, Shakespeare's Richard III, and it was like, the reviews were not amazing, to say the least. And I realized, not that I had made the best production of Richard III that has ever been made, but I'm not even defending any part of my production, but like when you make something like that, you're going to get compared to every other, like they're going to be comparing you to, the one that Ian McKellen was in and the one Laurence Olivier was in. You're going to get compared to everything. So when you're Denis Villeneuve and you're making something of this scope and scale and ambition, it's a very ambitious adaptation. You're going to get raked over the coals about any giant science fiction movie that had desert scenes. And, it's right there in the title, Dune. Arrakis is a desert planet. And I really feel like it was a strong effort, and I'm looking forward to the next part. And I was completely engaged, and I thought the cast was just awesome. And the cinematography was amazing. And the VFX, I feel like the thing about Denis Villeneuve movies is like every element put into it is so top shelf that, you're kind of in a way judging how you feel about the top shelfness of that thing. You don't have to give it any willing suspension of disbelief and go like, oh, that, if I squint, that model looks like a real thing. Like, it's going to look as real as the current technology can make it. And, his work is very, very thoughtful. So it was exciting to me because, as I have ranted on here many a time, I feel like genre movies don't always get the respect they deserve. And it's fun to see a genre movie made with such care.
Yeah, and I got to say that the cool flying dragonfly-like things that they've got, holy crap, those are awesome.
Amazing.
Sound cool. And the cool,
amazing,
really cool.
Amazing
really
piece of
nice touches.
Just an amazing piece of design, an amazing piece of visual effects, an amazing part of the story, that doesn't feel like, hey, look what I can do, but it feels like it's hardwired into this world. I think it's definitely worth a look.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so Ben, we gotta thank some people, and before we do that, though, where can people find you? Where can people get more Ben Rock?
You can find me at benrockonline.com, and apparently you can find me on Twitter. Holy crap!
Yeah.
I've never had a
Yes.
tweet. I've never had a tweet blow up like that. I kind of feel like I'm making dick and fart jokes all the time, and suddenly I said something, and the world's like, "Hey, everybody,
Let's pay
listen to
attention
him."
to that guy.
Hey, Reuters. Although what was funny actually was when Sky News had me on. They were like, "Okay," because it's Halloween and everyone makes their Twitter handle, horror-y related. So I had changed it to Ben Rockula. Not the most original, unless you realize that Rockula was like a really cool vampire musical that came out in like 1989, which I have seen.
Really?
And Thomas Dolby is in it. True story.
Wow.
And actually someone who totally coincidentally, I know Dean Cameron is, I think, the lead in Rockula. Anyway, so on Sky News, they were like, they didn't say it on air, but when they got me on the phone, they're like, "So Ben Rockula, thank you for coming." I'm like, "It's just Rock. It's just Rock. Please don't say Rockula on the air. I'm not Ben Rockula." But
that would have been great if they introduced you as Ben Rockula.
Anyway, in short, you can find me at Ben Rock online. Ilya, where can people find you?
You can find me over at Hot Red Cameras, hotredcameras.com, and that's where I spend my Monday through Friday. If you want to, chew the fat, talk about lenses or cameras or lights, that's something I do basically all week long, and to a wide variety of people. And if you can't get a hold of me, there's plenty of people in my shop who can certainly have those same conversations. But some people just want to talk to me for whatever reason. I had a really great meeting. A couple people came in, got shirts last week.
Nice.
And and I mentioned the podcast. They were in from the East Coast, and it was really great to connect with them. Yeah, so it was fun. But also, we should throw a quick shout out here to assemble.tv, and definitely go to our YouTube channel and watch the video on Assemble if you want to try this incredible productivity software for your production, specifically for productions and managing your productions. You can use the promo code Cinepod and get a month free. You get to try it for free for a month, but then you use our code word Cinepod, and then you get a month free on us. So, and
it would be an excellent way for you to share with all your collaborators various ways to simulate muzzle flash without using blanks. You could just get the links and put them there and share them with everybody. You could even do test footage and share the test footage with them.
Yeah, 100%. Let's thank some people. Let's thank Kay Zalatrachi. Kay Zalatrachi made all the music that you heard in today's episode. And you know what? Maybe he'll make us some new music. Who knows? Maybe we should update.
Interestingly, Kay, I know, has seen Dune twice. And I believe he saw one screening at the DGA with Denis Villeneuve afterwards being interviewed by Christopher Nolan. So... And he's not in the Directors Guild, and I am. What's wrong with me? Why don't I go to these things? Anyway, I have a 3-year-old. That's why.
Well, you have a child. That's why. You've decided to give up on the all of the things you used to do before kids.
The freewheeling going to Q&As thing that I used to do a lot of. Anyway, but yeah, let's thank Kays. We should definitely thank Ben Katz, who were dumping 17 metric fuck tons of audio files on today because our rant about this. The situation on the movie Rust. I don't know. I feel like it's important to talk about.
Yeah, I do too. I think we'll need to be judicious going forward, but it's a conversation that's not going away. It's very timely with the union negotiations going on right now, and as horrible as the situation is, if there's some sort of profound change that can come from it, it's not worth it. But necessarily, it's a silver lining that could possibly help other people and prevent this sort of thing from happening.
That's all it is. It's a silver lining. It's a way that we don't lose other people in the future to a stupid thing we don't need to do.
Senseless.
Yeah. And lastly, we should thank our producer, Alana Cody, who was responsible for lining up this and all of our interviews. We have some really exciting ones coming up. I have one on Tuesday that I'm going to be doing that I'm very interested to get into. But Alana works tirelessly to make this show awesome and to give us great people to talk to.
Yeah, and there's more great people coming up. So, dear listeners, please keep coming back to us. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And if you know anyone who you think might like this, please tell them. We're not a big, shout it from the rooftops kind of show. We're not taking out ads all over the place and saying, listen to us. So we rely a lot on word of mouth. If you feel like telling people that we exist, we really appreciate that. And if you want to come into Hot Rod Cameras and mention that you like the show, there's a free t-shirt in it for you. I'll gladly hand you a t-shirt.
And Ilya will personally hand you that T-shirt. You can demand
if I'm there, 100%. I'll hand the T-shirt.
He will leave wherever he is, even if he's at Camera Image in Poland, and he'll come back and give you a T-shirt right then.
I'm not going to Camera Image this year, so there's no chance of that. Anyway, I think that's it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and we will see you next week at the podcast.
Thanks for listening.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.